Welcome, thanks for joining me, astrologer Patrick Arundell, for your in-depth weekly astrology overview for week commencing the 15th of April. I'm going to share with you on the screen the event chart for this week that we can all collectively relate to, but please stay with me. I will go through each of the 12 zodiac signs, from Aries through to Pisces, that you can relate to in terms of your ascendant, your sun or the moon, and share with you your zodiac forecast for the week. I'd just like to say thank you so much for joining me. If you are new to my channel, it's great to have your company. This is very much a community. If you have any thoughts, please do share them. If you're a returning visitor, all your views and interactions are truly appreciated. If you've yet to subscribe to my channel, please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. Every time I drop a video, you should get an alert from YouTube. I'd just also like to tell you about my free written daily horoscopes, which you can get fired to your device each morning by clicking on the link beneath this video. I've been writing these for near to 30 years. My work is featured in one of Britain's most read daily newspapers and websites the world over. I also provide an analysis of the dominating planetary energy of each day, so we get the bigger picture of what's going on in the sky, as well as enjoying what's going on for our particular zodiac sign. Also, if you'd like to have a one-to-one with me, why not check out my testimonials? Please see the link beneath the video for them. I don't edit these as they come in, I put them on the website as is. Check out what people's experience has been of working with me. Finally, if you are a patron, thank you so much for all your support. I really appreciate it. If you've yet to become a patron, please see the link below to find out more. I do share additional information through Patreon that I don't share elsewhere. So on the screen now is that event chart. The big takeout immediately is the position of the path of fortune. This is a critical point in the chart. It shows us where we could have some luck, but it links to Pluto, the planet of change. But the path of fortune is in the relating air sign of Libra, Pluto in the air sign of Aquarius, Pluto about transformation. It may be through some common interest, something we can come together with another person that we have a shared enthusiasm for, or some collaboration or cooperation, that actually helps us to expand our prospects but also our network in a fortunate way. Now, the other thing to share with you is the moon is in its home sign of Cancer. What's not to like? Certainly gives us a prod to be in touch with how we feel. But last week, of course, was a very dramatic week with the total solar eclipse in Aries. We still have a lot of action going on in Aries, including Venus, the North Node, Chiron, and the retreating Mercury. And they're all going to be part of this week's story. Quarter moons occur twice a month. As we look at the sky, they appear to be a half moon. We start the cycle with the new moon, where the sun and the moon are unified. Then we have the tension of the quarter moon 1 week later, because it's at 90 degrees with the sun. Then the big drama of the full moon, when the moon and the sun are in opposition. Then we have the second of the quarter moons. Quarter moons provide a backdrop energy for the following week. And all that Aries energy last week was pushing us to celebrate what makes us individual, what enriches us in terms of our creativity, the things we get excited about, where we're trying to edge forwards and really open up new possibilities. So what the moon's saying really is, don't forget how it feels. Also be conscious of the people around you. Or is what you're doing actually for your own good in terms of your emotional needs? Just a few things to consider for the whole of the week. But we did also have the ruler of the sign of Aries, Mars, meet Saturn last week on the 10th, a really tricky influence, especially with Mars in the sign of Pisces. It moved into Pisces on the 23rd of March, and since then has potentially been stirring up the sediment of old issues, hurts and angers, disputes, where we feel there's been an injustice. But Mars is really in some ways muted in Pisces, and that conjunction with Saturn created potentially a lot of frustration. So as this week begins, Mars has moved forwards. It's about 3 degrees away from Saturn, so it's still going on a bit. We may not feel as motivated as we'd like, but actually as this week goes on, Mars turns out to be hugely influential because it's going to be linking to Jupiter and Uranus, which are edging into their conjunction, the first for 14 years. They started to collaborate in a big way some time ago. It's an influence which hasn't happened since 1997. That time was in Aquarius, a fixed sign. This time it's going to be in Taurus, a fixed sign. But before then, Mercury is very active this week. First of all, it meets up with Venus. So the retreat in Mercury connects with Venus. If we have gone through some kind of discussion, or we've been reminiscing recently with all that Pisces energy, or there has been a separation or some unhappiness around a relationship, there's an opportunity now to rethink. Mercury retrogrades definitely can be beneficial. Venus in Aries loves to make things happen. Mercury here can perhaps slow Venus down a little bit, so there could be a discussion, or perhaps if there has been some kind of upset, a chance to pause and reflect. But then Mercury meets up with the North Node, and we start to get pulled towards instinctively what we feel the right thing is to do. So that's a very exciting conjunction for sure. And also with Chiron. Is there something that needs to be thought about some more about our sense of identity, which is what that total solar eclipse really did arouse. But then by Friday, we have an incredibly important event, which I don't think will get as much coverage as the conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus. And it's when the Sun moves into Taurus. All that energy that we've been expelling lately, and all the industry and the determination and drive and passion of the sign of Aries, we get a chance to see, is it forging some kind of foundation? Is it gaining some traction? So that in itself is exciting. But of course the sign of Taurus can be about money, can be about self-worth, can be about values, can be about farming, food. It can also be about the more sultry or calorific elements of life that we enjoy because of the Venusian rulership of the sign. But the Sun squares with Pluto. This is very, very powerful. If we think Pluto in Aquarius is pushing us to rethink our longer term future, but also examine our values, the Sun in Taurus is much more concerned with what we need immediately. It's immediate money, it's our immediate instincts. It's where we need to feel our senses can be indulged, and the two do not work well together. So if we're resisting some kind of big change in our lives, it could create a lot of tension. Then again, if you're someone who's very much into personal development, you may be aware of this aspect and prepared to go with the flow, because that's when Pluto works best. But then that brings us to Sunday, and that conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus. Let's just think back to when Uranus moved into Taurus, a sign that it's not at its best in. It was, to begin with, for 5 months in 2018, then from March 2019. And since then, it's been a very provocative influence. You could say that we've seen a lot of industrial action about what's perceived as unfairness around terms and conditions. Remember, Uranus is the co-ruler of the idealistic sign of Aquarius, and Taurus can be about money. But we've also seen industrial disputes linked to farming, where farmers quite rightly feel that, they're not being compensated properly from the distribution chain, but mainly supermarkets. We've created this dependency on supermarkets, but of course they have so much power that they've been imposing more and more onerous terms on the growers. So we've seen some tensions there. We've also seen land grabs. Uranus can be quick darting, sudden, dramatic, unpredictable energy. Taurus can be land. Jupiter, of course, as it comes into the exact conjunction with Uranus, can be about international affairs. So we have seen some big stuff going on in that regard as well. I want to say to you that Jupiter conjunct Uranus can have its upside and it can have its downside. One of the things with Jupiter, for its more spiritual aspirations of its rulership of Pisces in the sign of Taurus, could push us to be less focused on money, less focused on the material world, more focused on the things that, the simple pleasures of life, if you like. But Jupiter can also be about dogma, particularly for its rulership of Sagittarius. It can be about people imposing their values on other people, whether they like it or not. And I'm sure you can recognize immediately what's going on in the wider world where that kind of stuff is happening. And of course, we've got a lot of technological change, very Uranian, but some of it could be to help us. You know, we could have some technologies that come in around health, for example, that will be very smart and save lives. But the motive, quite a lot with this technology, will be to deforestate the workforce. And that's not necessarily good for personkind. So we've got some big shifts going on, fantastically powerful stuff. Yes, we can embrace change and innovation, Uranus, but we need to have a firm idea of what the philosophical output of that will be, Jupiter. So they bring the week to an end, but Mars is linking to them. So if we've overcome some of the things that Mars has provoked within us recently, Mars could, in the sign of Pisces, just ask us to stay in touch with all our collective experiences in terms of desire as it's gone through the whole zodiacal circle, because obviously Pisces is the sign of culmination. When Mars moves into Aries on the 30th of April, that's a new beginning. That's going to be really exciting and very dynamic. But Mars generally supports Jupiter and Uranus. When Mars and Jupiter are together, for example, it gives us more energy, more thrust, more self-belief, a little bit more ability to live in the moment, not analyse things so much, be a bit more risk-taking and daring. But that square between the Sun and Pluto is also a timely reminder to stay in touch with the things that are really important: people, community, relationships, Pluto in Aquarius, temper our desire for financial gain, but also enjoy the good things in life, but be aware that by getting those good things, there is some kind of impact on planet Earth, Taurus, the Earth, because it's an Earth sign. So that's it for this week. I'm now going to go on and share each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces. But if you'd like to ascend above this zodiac forecast and embrace the power of more serious astrology, if you give me 3 pieces of personal birth data of time, date and place of birth, I'll produce for you your life roadmap report. This will give you searing insights to the patterns that are playing out in your life so far, but also a much more intimate knowledge of how to work with those energies in a more succinct way going forwards. In my special package of 30% off, you can also get your 12 months transit report. This is the moving planets in the sky interacting with your quite unique blueprint. This helps you to see the energies moving as the year goes on and prepare yourself to react and act in a way which is of benefit to you. Please see the link below for more. If you are aware of your natal astrology but would like to explore Draconic astrology, you can get the same package. Draconic astrology is based on our soul, our karma, what we bring to the earth when we arrive. It's the roots of our being. The natal chart is the fruit of our journey through this life. Draconic astrology is absolutely gripping. Some people see their Draconic chart and it makes much more sense than their natal. Same package, please see the link below for more. Welcome Aries to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 15th of April for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. On the screen now I'm sharing the event chart right at the start of the week. How did you find last week's total solar eclipse in your sign? Has it created an extra sense of excitement? Do you feel more motivated around the strands that are really important to you? I do hope so. Of course, last week your ruler Mars was conflicted by the limiting energies of Saturn and in a very psychological area. So if you have been lacking a little bit of conviction or maybe even confidence around certain interests or things that you're working on at the present time, it wouldn't be a complete surprise. And yet at the start of this week, the moon is in its home sign of Cancer, really encouraging you to stay in touch with how things feel just when all the energy in your sign is really pushing you to live in the moment, take very direct action. How do you deal with this? Well, the quarter moon, which emerges later on Monday, does provide a backdrop of energy for the whole week. So it's possible that you will need to just tune in to your inner world to check that whatever you are really engaged with at the present time is truly the right thing, because you're at your best when you don't think about things too much. You listen to your instincts and just go for it. But because Saturn is pretty close to Mars at the start of this week and this quarter moon, you may have to shrug off any self-limiting thinking that you've got or self-doubts if you really want to continue to seize the moment. Now, the path of fortune is in your sector of relating, and it's forging a great link to Pluto, the planet of change, in the part of your situation to do with friendships. There may be one person or group of people that you can align to really positively this week. Don't underestimate your charm and charisma, because as Mercury reverses, so Venus steps forwards, and they come into an exact conjunction. And that's a very, very sparkly alliance. It occurs on Friday, but they're pretty much together within 3 degrees all this week. Now, obviously, Mercury is about how we think, speak, discuss, articulate, and Venus can be about, certainly in your sign, can be about listening to our desires and going for it. So if there is someone that you're interested in, you may decide just to be much more forward and take that chance of actually reaching out to them. But it also can be an opportunity to talk over a relationship issue with someone you already know. Doesn't have to be in a romantic context, but you may need to take the lead to get the best of that particular combination. But Mercury is also going to meet the North Node as well. So listening to your instincts, which I think you have a great gift for, is going to be important. Now, of course, as this week develops, so we're seeing the conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus get ever closer, but that's not to the end of the week. And the really big news story beyond that aspect is the move of Friday of the Sun into Taurus. So the things you have been working on over the last 3 weeks, by the end of this week, you can start to see the progress you've made, because for you, Taurus means foundations. It does mean self-worth, it can mean value, and it can mean money. So if there is something you've been really putting a lot of effort into that's more creative, you can start to see things shape up really positively, and maybe your finances can improve as well. It's just that the Sun is in a square with Pluto. This is one of astrology's mighty influences. If we think about it, the Sun is our innate energy, but Pluto is very much to do with power, control, change, and sometimes we can encounter people or situations which don't necessarily flow easily. So even if you want to convert your recent efforts into extra money, you want to squeeze a little bit more from your resources with the Sun's help moving into Taurus, joining up with Jupiter and Uranus. So Jupiter is saying you can be progressive, Uranus is saying you may need to be innovative, Pluto is saying you need to be mindful of your values, because your values, your higher values, your more spiritual direction in life may need to chaff with some of the realities of your situation. So for example, you could be offered a job where the pay is good, but it's not quite something that your heart would be in. So that's the type of scenario that this Sun square Pluto aspect can create. But then on Sunday, the big event of the year so far really is Jupiter and Uranus coming together for the first time in 14 years. But you've had quite a long time to prepare for this. This is an aspect that's been building up recently within 3 degrees. But also Jupiter moved to join Uranus a year ago in May, and that transition of Jupiter into your second house may have given you some kind of uplift around your resources, or it's possible that Uranus has been creating some instability in that area. Now the Sun, Jupiter and Uranus all come together in the sign of Taurus, you have a chance to really think about this and explore the opportunities. But the great news is that Mars has moved forwards from that very difficult transition to Saturn and actually feeds in to the relationship between Jupiter and Uranus. So past efforts, past experience, past knowledge can start to come back to you, and you could see that financial uplift. But I do feel that with Pluto in the mix, it is important to be very realistic. And perhaps, really, it's like I say, there could be some conflicts between what you'd really like to happen and what the reality is that is open to you at this present time. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Aries. I hope you have a great week. Thank you so much for joining me. If you've yet to do so, please like, comment, share, or subscribe. Welcome, Taurus, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 15th of April for the Ascendant, the Sun, or the Moon. I think it's fair to say that you've probably been doing quite a bit of soul searching of late, or at least reflecting, just really perhaps considering what's occurred over the last 12 months, or perhaps further back into your life. And that's because of all the energies, including your ruler in your 12th house, which is a very meditative area. It's also one where we can heal. It's also one where we may need to detach a little bit more from others. And with Mercury in retrograde in the 12th house, perhaps you have felt a little bit cut off, or not so much in touch with other people. Well, the great news for you, Taurus, is that this week the Sun is going to move back into your sign for the first time in 11 months. When on Friday it travels into Taurus, but as it does go into a right angle with Pluto. But I'll tell you more about that shortly. But also last week, of course, Mars applied to Saturn. There may have been a tense moment around a friendship, or maybe a future plan that had been really important to you suddenly felt a bit blocked or inhibited. And that too has been feeding that need to just take a little bit of time out and really consider all your options. But of course, the other massive story this week is the fact that Jupiter meets Uranus in your sign for the first time in 14 years. This is an aspect which definitely has opportunities, but it does have some challenges in some ways. But because Uranus has been with you full time since 2019, it's given you quite a lot of practice to get used to its sometimes turbulent energies. What it's really been encouraging you to do is in some ways leave behind the more security conscious part of your nature and go for the things that make you feel alive and fresh and stimulated. So the combination with Jupiter, which of course is the planet of fortune and the planet of growth, is really asking you to have that confidence to be individual. And that's the crux of this week, because with Pluto applying to the Sun, maybe is you're needing to work with or work for someone who has got a more traditional view of life or a more traditional expectation of the way you should be. And perhaps that's part of what you've been pondering of late. Where do you apply the person you are becoming in this fast changing world? Well, the real ace in the pack for you this week, Taurus, is Mars. Because as the week goes on, Mars escapes the clutches of Saturn, but then stimulates both Jupiter and Uranus. Now that reaches a peak on Friday, but he's still going to be there supporting Jupiter and Uranus, when they have that big meeting on Sunday. So a lot of extra dynamism is coming into your situation as this week goes on. It is true that the quarter moon is a bit tricky. I still feel that there's someone or some people that have proved to be a little bit disappointing. Or you may be finding yourself much more sensitive to what you read online, whether it's the news or what people share on Facebook, and just the overwhelm that we can all suffer with all the information that pounds our senses is something that this week I still feel is something you need to detach yourself from. So focus very single-mindedly on what's important to you, but you may be needing to accept that some people who have been part of your life are making way. However, that's not a 100% fact, because as Venus meets the retreating Mercury, and that is on Friday, someone who you thought had been strangely out of touch could get in touch, and that can really please you. And it just turns out that, just like you, they've had a lot of distractions, a lot of things to deal with, and that's why they've not been in touch. But there may be some players or groups of people that you are starting to move away from, even if it feels they're moving away from you. So it can be a sensitive week still, but by the end of the week, a huge opportunity to recover your drive, your physical vitality, your self-belief is going to present itself. But with all those planets and influences still in the 12th house, it is important to integrate the more spiritual and psychological part of your being into the part of you really wants to get on the front foot, get stuck in, make things happen. So if you do find that energy come into you at the end of the week, it is important still to be very much in touch with your senses still. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Taurus. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great week. And if you've yet to do so, please do subscribe. We've found that 55% of people that watch my videos are not subscribers. So it would be really great if you are one of those people that you did subscribe now. Welcome, Gemini, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 15th of April for the Ascendant, the Sun, or the Moon. On the screen now, I'm showing the event chart at the start of the week. The big takeout is your ruler Mercury continues its retrograde, but it is going to be meeting up with Venus this week, and that peaks on Friday. If there have been some crosswires with friends recently, some last minute changes of plans socially, or your work situation has been quite heavy and that's prevented you from interacting and networking as much as you would like, by the end of this week there's going to be a great opportunity to get together and reconnect. But also, this is a week which begins with a quarter moon. Now the quarter moon for you is in house 2. The moon's in its home sign of Cancer, but the second house is about our values, can be to do with our sense of self-worth and money. Because it's squaring up with planets and influences in your 11th house, that's where you're most idealistic. There may be a situation this week where you just have to attune things a little bit. Perhaps someone is taking you somewhat for granted. Perhaps it's a friend who takes your generosity for granted, and that's something just to be mindful of. But of course, last week, Saturn did apply to Mars right at the top of your chart. If there were some heavy pressures professionally, or you had to deal with someone who put a big expectation upon you, perhaps just at a time when you're wanting to spend more time being a bit freer, perhaps even consider some of your long-term plans, that may have been a bit of a niggle. But as this week goes on, Mars does actually move forwards and escapes the clutches of Saturn. So I feel that some of that heaviness can make way a little bit. But of course, the big news story of this week is the conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus, which comes on Sunday, the first for 14 years. And therein, a very complex part of your chart, the 12th house, but the Sun is going to move there also on Friday. And I don't think that's going to get so much coverage, to be honest, but it is really important because it squares up with Pluto, which is one of astrology's more awkward influences. It's possible that when it comes to your psychological situation, by Friday, and then the peak, the conjunction between Jupiter and Uranus on Sunday, that some sensitive strand or psychological matter, a revelation could occur. And that's because of Pluto being in the ninth house, your sister air sign of Aquarius. And the ninth house can be to do with higher truths, can be to do with a legal matter, could be to do with something that you would prefer to keep confidential. Pluto can be to do with secrets. The ninth house tends to push things into the open, whereas the 12th house can be an area where we encounter people who don't have our best interests at heart. So in traditional astrology, it's known as secret enemies. Because the sun goes through this area for 4 weeks, I don't want you to think that everyone's plotting against you. It's just not as simple as that. When the sun moves into the 12th house, essentially it asks us to review what else occurred in our life in the previous 11 months. So it's our time to really take a little bit of a check, perhaps be a little bit more contemplative, maybe withdraw a little bit from the amount of socialising that may have been going on for you recently, despite those occasional crosswires with Mercury's retrograde. So if you do want to invest more in personal development or go on some kind of retreat, go for some healing, see a complementary therapist, that kind of stuff will really work well for you over the next month. It's just the sun squaring with Pluto is essentially about power, and someone may have a determination to impose their power upon your situation. So, for example, if you're discussing a financial matter to do with your work, you must prepare yourself that the response that you could be about to get might not be particularly fair, even though the ninth house is where we would like things to be fair. But it could be that you're dealing with the politics of a big organisation. Maybe it's a smaller business, and the financial reality of their situation could in some ways come into your situation. So as much as the 12th house can be a very positive area, it can reveal things that are a bit awkward. And because Uranus is a very restless, provocative, nerve-jangling influence, and it has been for you for 5 months in 2018 and ever since March 2019, aggravating your 12th house. Sleep has probably been more difficult to come by. Maybe you felt a little bit on edge at times. Maybe there's been things to do with your past that have suddenly come up and been rather disruptive. Maybe your own nervous system has felt stretched out at times. So what does Jupiter bring to the equation? Well, Jupiter can be about knowledge, and it can be about the spiritual dimension through its rulership of Pisces. If we're thinking about Jupiter in terms of the sign of Taurus, it can be linked to money and growth. So the opportunity here could be growth around how you think about your psychological situation. Or the 12th house can be the sector of culmination. So it may be past skills and experiences that you've gained that you reapply now in a fresh way, Uranus, innovation, but actually gives you some kind of return, Jupiter in Taurus. So there are things to gain from that particular influence for sure. But if you have been feeling a bit rocked around by Uranus over this last 5 or 6 years, I think Jupiter's saying the more you can read about the psychological domain, the more you can bring that part of you into the whole part of your thinking, the more that you're going to actually gain a lot from this next month of the sun going through your 12th house, but also that combination of Jupiter and Uranus. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Gemini. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a great week. If you've yet to subscribe, we've discovered that 55% of my viewers are not subscribers. So we'd be very grateful if you did support the channel by clicking or tapping that bell notification symbol. Welcome Cancer to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 15th of April for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. On the screen now I'm sharing the event chart right at the start of the week. Now last week gave you a great opportunity to set your intentions in terms of how you want to connect to the wider world. Not everybody is focused in terms of their work, but if that is an area that's important to you, there's every chance that over the next 6 months you will move towards something that works well for you. But also as this week begins, Mars is emerging from that dust up that he had last week with Saturn in the part of your chart to do with travel, perhaps linked to work, or a point of principle may have been something that created some tension. Now as you come into this new week, the moon is in your sign. That's wonderful, all fair and dandy. But it does start the week in a square with Venus, then the North Node, and later on Monday forges a quarter moon with the Sun in Aries. So we've got two cardinal signs competing for attention, if you like, but they represent different energies. The moon is obviously our need to be secure, we want to be receptive, emotionally in touch with ourselves. So if you are trying to engineer some new opportunities professionally, the one thing I would say to you is that do stay in touch with how things feel. You know, maybe you will be offered a huge opportunity, but it has to be one that you feel comfortable with the place that you work for you in terms of its location, with the people and the energy of that particular organization fit in with your ethos. Those are things to consider. Now in your personal situation, you may have been shown a lot more leadership recently and directing or helping or supporting someone close to you. But finding that pivot point between what's right for you and what's right for them is just going to be something that requires some care this week. But having said that, with the retreating Mercury meeting the advancing Venus, and they come into a conjunction on Friday, charm will get you everywhere, Cancer. So if you are having an appointment professionally in your local community, it may be to discuss something that's been a bit stuck, that hasn't quite been flowing for you. But that's where Mercury retrogrades can be a good thing, if we can embrace them to revisit something and make some amends that are very valuable. Now obviously Jupiter and Uranus are inching closer together, ready for that big conjunction later this month. So just about 1 degree apart now. You may be feeling this energy quite strongly already. Essentially it's very future orientated for you, but it's also to do with your connections to others, but it does feed back into goals and ambitions, the Aries energies, because essentially I feel Jupiter and Uranus want you to be able to exist in a way that does fit in with your values. So that's really, really important for you this week. Now by Friday, the Sun joins up with Jupiter and Uranus in the sign of Taurus. Now that's a very sociable transition, and if you have felt there has been a lot to deal with recently and perhaps a lot of big decisions to make, it's nice really to feel that there may be some lighter and more interactive moments ahead, and that is possible. But equally, because the Sun squares up to Pluto exactly for a few days, from around Thursday to the end of the week, if there is a friendship or an association you have that feels a bit controlling or a bit limiting or inhibiting, the politics of that situation may become more obvious to you. Or perhaps your own idealism may need to be tempered with the financial reality of a shared resources, you know, whether you're in a long-standing romantic alliance or a business relationship, or you've worked for a company a long time. If you are wanting to do something different and more radical, which is possible with Jupiter and Uranus in your 11th house, and Mars, as it goes on this week, starts to connect back to them in a really positive way, which can give you a lot of thrust that did at times last week seem a little bit out of reach because of the handbrake that Saturn had been applying to the more get-go energies of Mars. So there could be some big decisions to make towards the end of this week, but that combination between Mercury and Venus, and also with the North Node, suggests your communicational skills is really going to be an important part of how this week works out for you. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Cancer. Thank you so much for joining me. I would be grateful if you've yet to do so if you'd subscribe. We've found out that 55% of my viewers are not subscribers, so to help support the channel, we'd be most obliged if you'd click or tap that bell notification symbol. Welcome, Leo, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 15th of April for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. On the screen now, I'm showing the event chart right at the start of the week. The potency of that total solar eclipse is going to play out for the next 6 months, but you can still see that you have a lot of energy still in the sign which hosted the eclipse, Aries. But that's house 9 for you. Aries may be about initiation, fresh starts, injecting ongoing strands with greater passion. But the 9th house is about exploring. It's about being independent. It's about changing things up, being more spontaneous. Now, your quality is fixed. This means that your preference is for continuity. So although you're a fire sign, and of course ruled by the sun, which gives you a very powerful aura, there is a part of you that can find at times change a little bit challenging. So when changes come, they tend to do so in quite the dramatic way. And that's really the backdrop energy as we come into this new week. But I think you could find yourself wanting to be a truth seeker. Mercury in retrograde in the sign of Aries is also asking you to rethink some things, and Mercury meets up with Venus on Friday exactly, but they're pretty close together all this week. If a romantic relationship hasn't quite been working as you would like, perhaps that came up to the boil last week because of Mars, the planet of sex, being entrapped by the planet of limitation, Saturn. Or was it about shared finances that caused the tension? But as you come into this week, there is a chance to clear the air, but there is also a very tender location of the moon. You can see the moon's in house 12. Now there's a real paradox with all that 9th house energy, which is very out there. 12th house energy can be sheltered, private, all the way to wanting to retreat a little bit. How will this play out for you this week because of the quarter moon, which occurs later on Monday? Well, I think essentially if there are some tender issues that do need to be discussed, whether you're wanting to engage with the other person or they're wanting to push you to engage with them, it may be hard to resist these. And maybe some things that have been kept confidential, even secret until now, could suddenly come out into the open. Now that can sound and feel rather challenging, particularly if you are quite a private type of Leo. But I feel that at the moment there is a sense of change and newness around you. And it's a very radical influence, and it is going to go on for the next year, really. And I don't feel that you can resist it. I feel it's best to go with it. And essentially this change can be very exciting and positive for you. So as we come into this week, Mars is edging away from Saturn, so that tension could dissipate a bit. But also we've got Jupiter and Uranus getting ever closer in your 10th house of your professional hopes and your worldly interactions, suggesting if you do something creative or different, or you're drawn to anything to do with new trends or new technology, there's a brilliant opportunity developing for you. But it is all about pushing yourself outside your comfort zone. Now, also on Friday of this week, the Sun is going to join up with Jupiter and Uranus in your 10th house, which will help you to crystallize your ambitions and goals over the following 30 days. But as it does, it moves into a square with Pluto in Aquarius, house 7. Whether it's a professional relationship, or the personal one that I've spoken of before, there could be a little bit of a power battle that presents itself towards the end of this week. It may be something you can overcome. I think essentially what Pluto in your 7th house is doing, and all that energy in house 9, is giving you more thrust, more confidence, more conviction. Because of Pluto going through your 6th house for such a long time, since 2008, and except you are going to get one final blush of that from the 2nd of September to the 18th of November, that was a lot to do with sacrifice, hard work, providing services to others, but maybe at times it dimmed your flame. And one of the most important things about being a Leo is that you can showcase your charisma. So whether it's through offering services in your locality or working for a big corporation, you need to be at the heart of things, but you need to feel seen and recognized. But most of all, at this present time, you need to feel stimulated, and that your life role has a purpose that goes beyond just the more mundane parts of earning a living, like earning the money, because I feel that that sense of excitement that's really been building up recently is proving to be such a draw for you. So perhaps the clash that occurs at the end of this week is because somebody wants to maintain the status quo. Could be a partner, could be a family member, could be a colleague, could be a boss. And because you've got the spirit of adventure about you at the moment, you may encounter some resistance from the people who would like to keep things as they've been before. So that's the challenge for you, Leo. But with that sheltered moon right at the start of the week, just be aware that even though you are feeling in a very dynamic and go-getting part of the year, and Mars is going to link up with Jupiter and Uranus as the week develops, which will give you much more conviction about managing your finances, or if you're a business person, a lot of extra drive and thrust. But just stay in touch with the more sensitive side of your nature, or be aware that something could come into the open this week that may need to be responded to, and it may take quite a deft touch in order to steer things as you want. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Leo, and have a great week. We've discovered that 55% of people who watch my videos don't subscribe to my channel. If you're one of them, I'd be honoured if you would now. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. Welcome, Virgo, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 15th of April for the ascendant, the sun or the moon. On the screen now is the event chart. Your ruler Mercury continues to retrace its steps. That will go on through to the 25th. But it is going to forge a brilliant alliance this week to Venus. Venus can be about relating, can be about romance, but it can be about money. And they're coming together in an exact conjunction on Friday. So that could be really important and helpful. But of course, last week, Mars was trapped by the more restrictive energies of Saturn in your 7th house. And the potency of the total solar eclipse stirred up many of us. How did that play out for you? Well, as this week begins, Saturn is just still in touch with Mars, but Mars is starting to inch away. And in fact, later this week forges a very dynamic angle to both Jupiter and Uranus, which are preparing to come into their exact alliance on the 21st. So there's some movement in your sector of relating, some movement in your sector of fresh ideas, the 9th house. But what about all those energies packed into Aries beyond Mercury and Venus? Well, as this week begins, the moon, you can see, is in its home sign of Cancer. For you, house 11, that's about friendship. It's about connecting to people that are important to you or your higher values. The 8th house position of the sun that the quarter moon forges later on Monday provides a backdrop for the next week. 8th house energy, which is where that eclipse occurred, is very much to do with transformations, and some of them can be deep. They can be to do with the practical and material sphere, shared resources, investments, money, mortgages, pensions, all that kind of stuff. but they can also be to do with very deep relationships and very much to do with where we're devoted or invested or psychological changes. So having the moon in the very friendly 11th house, but in the sensitive Cancer for you, squaring up with that sun, suggests that if there is someone in your friendship circle who tends to be a bit limiting, a bit needy, perhaps leverages you through jealousy or possessiveness, that's something that you won't appreciate this week. But then again, if you're going through some big changes in your situation, the moon's almost seeing you yearn for some kind of lighter, freer energy. So by the time we get to Friday, you're going to start to get that because the sun moves into your sister Earth sign of Taurus, joining up with Jupiter and Uranus. The sun here for you emphasizes the energy that's been coming from them for some while to change things up, to push your circumstances in perhaps some new directions, which brings some greater variety. So if something has really been getting you down recently, some kind of transition can start to work into your situation later this week, which creates a freer sense of energy. It's just that the sun does immediately go into conflict with Pluto. And because you are someone who can be very conscientious, very committed to any role you have, very supportive to other people, and Pluto is emphasizing that in house 6, that energy of the sun going into house 9, which is much more independent, freedom loving, could see you conflicted a little bit about some of the changes that are developing in your situation. The great news is that Mars has moved away from that very restraining angle or conjunction to Saturn, and by the end of this week is absolutely bonding with Jupiter and Uranus in a very lively and stimulating way. So as much as there may be some big changes in your situation, there are some new, very big beginnings, which can be very exciting. It's just managing the transition. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a great week. We've been checking out our stats on YouTube, and 55% of people who watch my videos are not subscribers. If you're one of them, I'd really appreciate it if you could support my channel by clicking or tapping on the bell notification symbol and subbing too. Welcome Libra to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 15th of April for the ascendant, the sun or the moon. On the screen now I'm sharing the event chart right at the start of the week, which will provide the backdrop. And first up, we've got the Part of Fortune, an exciting opportunity because it's right on your first house cusp, linking brilliantly to Pluto. Pluto in the 5th house is pushing you to really showcase your talent, your creativity, your flair, but most of all, your passion. So that's a very, very energizing and positive combination that can add extra traction to this week's events. But as the week begins, the moon, you can see, is in house 10, which is in its home sign of Cancer. But the 10th house moon position may make it more difficult to disguise how you feel right through this week, because later on Monday, the moon's going to square up with the sun. So we have a quarter moon. Quarter moons provide a backdrop of energy for 1 week. So what we have here is the moon in the 10th house and the sun in the 7th. We're still feeling the force of that total solar eclipse in your sector of relating, and you do have a brilliant combination building up towards the end of this week on Friday, when your ruler Venus meets up with the retreating Mercury. Yes, Mercury is retrograde, but that can be a time when we can rethink, repivot, reposition ourselves to meet an opportunity. And when Venus and Mercury are together, it can be lucky. And because they're in your 7th house, it could be a relationship, a connection to someone, some kind of introduction that goes really well. But what about that quarter moon? I feel that the energy of that could show itself more in an existing relationship, to be honest. Maybe someone feels in an ongoing tie that there's part of your situation at the moment where you may be a little tense, and part of that tension came from the fact that Mars connected with Saturn last week, And they may feel, you may not see it the same way, that you were a little bit caught up with the details of things, maybe a bit edgy, maybe feeling a little bit more abrasive. Things you'd normally just let go may have been triggering you somewhat. But as Mars moves on this week, it does escape that more punishing dimension that Saturn can bring in the 6th house. And what I'd say to you is the Sun in the 7th house is about diplomacy, but not to the point where we give away what we need for ourselves. So the Moon in a way is reminding you, important to stay mindful of what your goals and ambitions are, what your direction of travel is around them, because the Moon in the 10th house is asking you to think about your work, your professional interactions, but most of all, your connection to the world at large in a way which feels comfortable. So it's back to that people-pleasing thing again. There's too much give, not enough get. The Moon will see it, make it harder for you to disguise your frustration. But at the same time, the combination between Mercury and Venus does give you a big opportunity. So I just feel it's in those ties that are more established, where if there is something that's slightly out of alignment between what you feel you give and what you get, that may still need a bit more work. But of course we do have Jupiter and Uranus preparing to come together in that exact conjunction in week 3, and they're joined by the Sun on Friday of this week. The Sun going into the 8th house is really, for me, like the 7th house is the conversation because it's very Libran, air. The 8th house is very Scorpio, so it's very much more to do with the feeling. But also the 8th house can be about transformations. Those transformations can be at a practical level, shared resources, business, investments, pensions, or it can be much more psychological, or it can be much more to do with where we're intimate or invested in someone. So there's clearly an opportunity with those two cresting together. There could be some challenges as well. It won't be one dimensional, but the Sun moving into this area suggests that if there have been discussions recently, particularly with that Mercury Venus conjunction, which happens on the same day, incidentally, I feel the Sun will see you then want to just retreat a little bit and let it all percolate through you so you can figure out what it means. By Saturday, as it comes into a square with Pluto, that's a really important angle, because when the Sun and Pluto do go through a 90-degree tension, that's pushing us in some way to change something. Pluto can be about change, but Pluto can also be about transformations. And in the 5th house, if you don't feel that you get value for your talent, the Sun moving into the 8th house, where we do want to be financially rewarded and secure, that could create some resentment. Or maybe it's around a romantic relationship, and it's back to that issue that you feel less heard than you feel you give. And the dialogue could be that Venus-Mercury conjunction. The Sun clashing with Pluto may be the outcome. So there are some contra energies this week for you, Libra, but in terms of being enterprising, creative, demonstrating your flair, it's good. I feel you'll feel less on edge. Some of the details of last week which were closing on you clear up. And as this week actually goes on, Mars forges a really excellent link to Jupiter. So your physical vitality by the week's end could improve, as long as you're not dealing with too much politics in your situation. And with the Moon right at the top of the chart, as I said, whether it's good or bad, it will be a week when you will show how you feel much more openly. It's been a real pleasure being with you. I hope you have a great week. We have done some research and found that 55% of my viewers are not subscribers. If you're one of them, please help me grow my channel by clicking or subbing on the bell notification symbol now. Welcome Scorpio to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 15th of April for the Ascendant, the Sun or the Moon. On the screen now I'm showing the event chart right at the start of the week. Now, your co-ruler of Pluto, your modern ruler, is right there down on house 4 still, but forges a very positive link to the part of fortune tucked up there in house 12. Something that you're thinking about, doing research on, becoming much more conscious of, can have a powerful impact on understanding how you want the inner part of your world to be. So it may be that you could do some reading this week, or some research, or just some deep contemplation with their help. Now, last week, your other ruler, your traditional ruler of Mars, was in that testy exchange with Saturn. Now, it's true that conjunctions where planets are side by side and therefore unified are not necessarily all bad. And for you, they were occurring in house 5, which is where you can showcase your talent. Now, since Saturn moved into that area a year ago, maybe it has felt a bit of an uphill struggle. If you are a creative, or you're someone who's a performer, or you're a maker, perhaps you've had to really apply yourself in order to get an output. Now, last week, you may have reached a point where you could really see progress, or you may have felt somewhat frustrated. If you have felt frustrated about your love life, for example, that particular combination could have been a bit challenging. But Mars is inched forwards at the start of this week, which is really positive for you. But later this week, it's forging a brilliant angle to Jupiter in your sector of relating. So if something was a bit stuck, tense, there were some discussions that weren't necessarily easy, there is an opportunity for things to flow and the air to be cleared as this week goes on. But of course, the total solar eclipse was focused on your 6th house, which is to do with transformations in around the practicalities of your life. And if you are thinking differently about your health and fitness and diet and nutrition and routines and organization and decluttering, and just really applying a lot of virtuous energies to those areas, really good for you. And that could be the great benefit of the total solar eclipse for you over the next 6 months, because with Chiron in the mix, the knowledge you gain over that next half year can really be helpful. But it's important to understand the 6th house is very much the sector of marginal gains. So small changes, 6, and details, 6, can feed into the big picture in a very positive way. So even if you're not necessarily seeing total results at the moment, do acknowledge the changes you've made. However, the week begins back to the wheel with the moon in your sister water sign of Cancer, which she rules, but in house 9. That's suggesting that there's part of you that, in a way, may want to shrug off those obligations, responsibilities and duties coming from house 6 as the moon squares with the sun later on Monday. That provides a backdrop for the next week. What I would say, as much as your chart does speak of this virtue at the moment, what you don't want to be is virtuous but then resentful. So if you feel like breaking out, doing something more liberating, doing something for yourself personally that's more independent, seize the opportunity, because it will make you feel good. So if someone asks you to cover their shift, or to do them a chore, or provide some kind of support, if it doesn't really work for you, don't conflict your sense of freedom. I don't actually think that will be good for you this week. But as the week goes on, Mercury in its retreat meets the advancing position of Venus. If you are applying for a job, don't underestimate just how persuasive and charming that you can be with that combination, because Mercury might be in retrograde, but in house 6, that is very much in keeping with its energies and influence of the sign of Virgo. So your detailing, ability to provide a service that's very efficient, but also the personality and people skills could be very attractive to someone. So Friday could be a key day for a meeting for you, not least because on that day the sun moves into your opposite sign. You've already got Jupiter and Uranus inching closer together for their big meet later this month. The sun comes into the equation, but it does square up with Pluto, your modern ruler, as this week draws to a close. The seventh house is an interesting area of astrology because a lot of people would think that it's about relationships, which it can be because it's very much in keeping with the energy of Libra, the seventh house, the descendant. But it's also where we can set our boundaries. And Uranus has been helping you with that over the last few years, maybe at times in a disruptive way, if you feel that someone is threatening your space or trying to impose their will or their needs in a way that sees you lose your freedom. That's not been so easy for you to accept. Now, Jupiter, of course, brought a more positive dimension in a year ago in May, and you may have enjoyed some luck around connecting with someone influential, perhaps even romantically. So the sun moves into this area, and it can promote the potential for cooperation, collaboration, but it's also important to set our boundaries. So it's not too much give. We're getting that tipping point right between what we need and how we tune into others. If that's sweet for you, I don't feel the square with Pluto will show itself so much, particularly if you're in an existing relationship. But if you are in a relationship of any kind, friendship, family, work, colleague, boss, or lover, where you don't feel heard, the sun squaring up with Pluto could see you feeling more affected by that. And maybe the moon being in the ninth house in the quarter moon could also see you being a bit more outspoken. Now, obviously, you can be quite private in terms of personal information and your inner world. And with Pluto right on that fourth house cusp, that is still a consistent theme for you. But seventh house energy in traditional astrology was known as the sector of open enemies. So it's about dealing with people at work that kind of have to get along with. They're not necessarily people we go for a drink afterwards with, but we still have to go through the process. And maybe you're going to become more conscious of who some of those people are over the next 4 weeks. But with Pluto in a way supporting you, being a bit stronger willed about making sure that what you get is important to the equation. So I feel the quarter moon, Mars moving away from Saturn, the lovely link between Mercury and Venus in the conjunction, and Mars then moving forwards by the end of the week to apply to Jupiter in a very energized way, suggests as this week goes on, it will shift from the more mundane, practical dimension into interacting with others more, but it has to work for you as well. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Scorpio. Have a great week. We've done some research and found that 55% of people who view my channel are not subscribers. If you're one of those, I really would be grateful if you could support our growth by clicking or tapping on the bell notification symbol and subbing. Welcome, Sagittarius, to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 15th of April for the ascendant, the sun or the moon. On the screen now, I'm showing the event chart right at the start of the week. There's still a lot of energy packed into the fifth house following on from last week's total eclipse in this area. The fifth house is where we can dazzle, be very charismatic. But Mercury is in a retrograde, it's true. And last week, despite that very powerful event, did the combination between Mars and Saturn somewhat mute your enthusiasm. It wouldn't be a surprise because they are in your fourth house of feelings. And Saturn has been inhibiting in that regard over the last year. You've really had to work at it. Maybe there's been some physical changes to where you're living. And Mars starts this week still pretty much in touch with Saturn. But the good news is that as this week goes on, Mars escapes Saturn's clutches and starts to apply in a brilliant way to Jupiter in particular, your ruler. And that happens by Friday. So I think your energy is going to come up this week. Things will develop in a freer way. Also, the action in House 5 is not at an end because Venus connects to the North Node, then meets the retreating Mercury on Friday too. That's a very flirty combination and could give you a push to go out, socialise, interact, do something more playful, go to watch a movie, a band, a show. Just let go a little bit of some of those recent restrictions that Saturn and Mars may have created. But the moon is in Cancer at the start of the week, in the deep house 8. The moon loves being in Cancer, but house 8 can be a position where the moon is a little bit affected by anxiety, if I'm honest. And later on Monday, it squares up to the sun, providing a backdrop through the quarter moon through to the end of the week. So 5th, 8th house energy. The 5th house is very joyful. The 8th house can be much more psychological. It's possible that if someone you're drawn to tends to be a little bit hard to read, maybe a bit distant, maybe there's some politics around a particular relationship at the moment. It doesn't have to be just a romance. That can be something that does come up as the week goes on, but the combination between Venus and Mercury is a mighty one, because Mercury retrogrades obviously cause niggles, delays, mix-ups and so forth, but they do provide opportunities to revisit things. And the 5th house could mean that you have a connection to someone by the end of this week, which actually proves to be really uplifting for you both. Now, Friday sees the sun make its way into the practical Taurus. Practical for you, not just because it's an earth sign, because it's house 6. It's where Jupiter, your ruler, has been since last May, and Uranus since 2019, March, full time. So your work, health, routines may have been disrupted over that period of time. It may not have been a straight line. The sun moving into this area gives you an opportunity over the next month to use 6th house energy, which can be to do with refinement, virtue, trying to clean things up, get things working a bit more orderly. And if you have been, very inventive of late, and it wouldn't be a surprise with all that Aries energy, packing that idea into something that's more tangible and workable, so form and function. It's just that the sun immediately comes into a tense right angle with Pluto. Pluto is in the part of your scope to do with your ideas, and at the very start of this week, your ideas actually could connect to someone in a very powerful way, as Pluto arcs in a very enabling 120-degree angle to the part of fortune. So that can be a great start to the week, but the square between Pluto and the sun is a bit more complex. It could create a lot of nervous energy if you try to reform elements of your situation maybe a little bit too rapidly. So you could feel a bit intense as the week draws to a close, but of course your ruler Jupiter is inching. It's now under 1 degree away from Uranus. They're coming into that direct conjunction on the 21st, but critically we have Mars ending this week, forging that very energized link to Jupiter. So whereas last week may have seen your physical vitality and feeling a bit flat emotionally, by the end of this week you're going to have a lot more stamina and a lot more desire to sort things out in your situation. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Sagittarius. I hope you have a great week. We have done some research and found that 55% of people who watch this channel are not subscribers. Please help the channel by clicking or tapping that bell notification symbol and being a subscriber too. Thank you. Welcome Capricorn to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 15th of April for the ascendant, the sun or the moon. On the screen now is the event chart at the start of the week. The first thing I'd like to draw your attention to is the moon. It's in the part of your situation to do with relating. The moon in the 7th house can lead to harmonious interactions, but later on Monday it does square up to the sun. That's a quarter moon, providing a backdrop for the rest of the week. And the sun's in the part of your situation to do with how you feel about things. So it's possible that you could encounter someone this week who's not quite as good as tuning into you as you are as listening to them, and that could create a little bit of tension. Or then again, maybe there's two people you get on well with who see things very differently, and you find yourself caught in the middle trying to play the proverbial peacekeeper. But of course last week your ruling planet Saturn did apply a lot of pressure to Mars. in your third house. If you suffered with migraines last week, or headaches, neuralgia, tension in your body, or felt depleted in your vitality, it wouldn't be a complete surprise. Of course, a lot of people would have seen that as being the total solar eclipse, but that actually had a real opportunity because of the role of Chiron. An opportunity to welcome in new emotional insights, or to share your skills and knowledge in this regard. And that part of your chart is still very active this week, not least with Mercury in its retrograde. There may be a discussion that goes on with someone you are close to, like a family member, perhaps around about Friday, when Venus and Mercury come into an exact conjunction. And if there has been something that's been going around your mind, bugging you perhaps a little bit, maybe even an injustice, be assured by the end of this week you're going to be feeling much more energized and much more able to stand up your side of things. This is because Mars escapes the clutches of Saturn as the week goes on and ends up in an amazing link by Friday with Jupiter. This is one of astrology's most energized combinations. Mars can, of course, be quite an impulsive influence, but the third house is going to see that vitality come up. And Jupiter in the fifth house is about expressing yourself. So whereas you may have felt a little bit tongue-tied last week, or not in the mood to engage with others as much as ordinarily would be the case, by the end of this week there is brighter energy coming, and that's going to be augmented not least by the arrival of the Sun in your fifth house. This is a really important moment of the whole year for you, because the fifth house, Taurus, not only shares your Earth triplicity, the fifth house is the Sun. It's very Leonian, so yes, it's an earthy host. This is where you emerge from the deep, rather reflective energies of the fourth house into the sunshine of the fifth house, which is very much about showcasing your talents. It's very charismatic, and we have that coming beautiful link between Jupiter and Uranus, the first in 14 years, but the Sun moving here, really significant, give you a lift. But it does square up to Pluto. Pluto, of course, moved out of your sign on the 21st of January, so you're still getting used to what Pluto's about for you. Essentially, he's asking you to think about the foundations in your life, but also about your values, and perhaps also about money. There may also be some transformations going on in terms of what you're eating. Perhaps you felt a greater need to get a bit more earthy in your choice of foods and nutrients. But these two square up. And the fifth house can also be an area where we speculate. So it can be to do with having a flutter. We show a little bit more self-assurance if there's something we're drawn to, whether it's a person or a project. And that can give us that extra gusto to live in the moment. So I feel the square with Pluto is essentially saying, you are a sign that's very much rooted in sensibility, pragmatism, checking things out, being very earthy in your approach, going through things in a very systematic way. The Sun and Jupiter and Uranus are pushing you to be a bit more frivolous over the next 4 weeks, and that could be a good thing to do. It could see you socialise and interact more, but it's also saying in its square to Pluto, you need to stay in touch with what makes you feel safe, and that's absolutely fine. So, as the week ends, Mars has moved away from Saturn, it's connecting with Jupiter in a very energized way. The Sun's bringing more sunshine literally into your situation. You just need to be a little bit cautious of not being too generous or too open with your resources as the week draws to a close. But there could be a conversation you have with Venus applying to Mercury, which just lifts a little bit of pressure and gives you extra peace of mind. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Capricorn. I hope you have a great week. We have done some research and found that 55% of people who view my channel are not subscribers. If you are one of them, please help support my channel and click or tap on the bell notification symbol and subscribe, and every time I drop a video you should get an alert. Thank you. Welcome Aquarius to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 15th of April for the ascendant, the sun or the moon. It's been quite a frenetic time of late with all that dazzling energy in the third house of your situation and the activation of the total solar eclipse. Third house is busy, it's quick moving interactions and messages, and of course Mercury, the ruler of this part of astrology, has been in retrograde since the 1st of April. But this week Mercury comes back to you in a positive way as Venus meets up with Mercury, and a piece of information or an email, a letter can arrive later in the week which really delights you. Also last week your traditional ruler Saturn was really applying pressure to Mars. Mars in the second house for you has given you an absolute determination to improve your financial lot, which Saturn has probably been challenging over the last year. Neptune in this area since 2012 may have seen you a bit too generous at times. Saturn has asked you to redress the balance, be much more cautious with resources, but then if things have really tightened up, Mars has come along from the 23rd of March and said, look, we really got to get our heads down, sort this out. But then last week they came into that conjunction, so things may have been pretty tense. As this week begins, Mars just inches away from Saturn, and that's a good news story. But also on the chart wheel, you can see that Pluto continues just into your sign, but arcs right on Monday with the part of fortune in house 9. A contact with someone further afield. It could be overseas. It may be someone who shares a vision or an idea you have, but somehow or another you can forge a collaboration which can be mightily productive in times to come. But also back to the wheel, there's the moon in Cancer, its home sign, but for you house 6, very much about practicality. So the moon's asking you, yeah, you've had a busy time Aquarius, now it's about getting things a bit more ordered on the home front, catching up on the chores, decluttering, as it comes into a square with the quarter moon later on Monday, providing a backdrop for the rest of the week. That's all good. Good to be virtuous. I need to remember this myself. But the fact is, one of the things we can do with 6th, third house energy is actually try too hard. Put ourselves into a frazzle by racing around, trying to get everything just so. Moon 6th house. So if you have been flat out recently, I wouldn't give yourself too much of a list of chores to achieve. But as Mars moves on this week, and as Venus and Mercury meet beautifully on Friday, so Mars connects with Jupiter, and something may come to pass, and it may be something quite tangible, some kind of improvement to your home. It could be some solid news around your ins and outs on your costs and expenses, something can come back a bit more into trim. But then on Friday the sun arrives in Taurus. This for you, house 4, is the nighttime part of your chart. It's where we withdraw a little bit, we reflect, and because of the intensity of the total solar eclipse and all that pulsating energy in house 3, it's sort of saying to you, look, take a breath. It's very atmospheric, it's very lunar orientated, house 4. And so the sun's moved there and saying, look, just find some peace and tranquility and just step back a little bit, and that can actually be very helpful. The problem is the sun almost immediately butts up against Pluto in your sign. Possible if there's a relationship issue with someone close who perhaps doesn't give you the space you need, or it's someone who needs your support a lot. It could be that the challenging energies that have been working around you of late means that you actually want to have some time out, whereas other people are used to seeing you pitch in more recently, and so there could be a little bit of a disappointment there. But there could be some kind of push and shove going on Pluto wants you to be totally authentically in your own self and energy, and to be honest, in your own ego. The fourth house is where you need to protect yourself, but you don't necessarily want so much of a discussion. So maybe it's an inner challenge that's going to come up as much as something around you. But that is possible as the week draws to a close. But all in all, bright energy still in third house with Mercury meeting Venus. Also Venus meets the North Node. So those important communications, real highlighted this week. The frustrations around money can ease, especially if you really put a hard shift of effort in to improve your lot. And by the end of this week, good news on the home and also on the communicational front, but don't try to pack too much into this week and take the breather as the week draws to a close, because I suspect you deserve it. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Aquarius. Have a great week. We have done some research and found 55% of people who tune into my channel don't subscribe. If you're one of those people, I'd be honoured if you would support the channel and click or tap on the bell notification symbol and sub. Welcome Pisces to your in-depth weekly forecast for week commencing the 15th of April for the ascendant, the sun or the moon. On the screen now, I'm sharing the event chart right at the start of the week for you. Now this provides an overview of what you can expect for the entire week. And you can see that Saturn retains its place in house 1, but Mars, which applied to it last week, created a lot of tension. And that tension may have really affected you in terms of headaches or feeling a bit stressed out, finding it more difficult to sleep. You can see that Mars is just inching away from Saturn, but I just want you to know, by Friday, Mars forges an absolutely stunning angle to Jupiter. So some of the frustrations and limitations you may have felt last week can ease. But of course, the total solar eclipse in Aries for you was very much about your sense of worth, because it's house 2. Chiron was in the mix, and that's also about our sense of personal identity. So those areas may have come up for you. And this week, as you can see, the moon is actually in your sister water sign of Cancer. So that's a great location for the moon. But by the end of Monday, it's squaring up with the sun. So we have a second, fifth house quarter moon. That's one that can make us much more mindful of where we're perhaps being a little bit too generous to loved ones. Could you help me with this again, please? Rather than taking responsibility for their own finances. So you may want to put your foot down a little bit about a situation like that. But equally, it's not the time to splash out on any grand and expensive gestures. If there is somebody new that you're being drawn towards, just let the relationship unfold at its own pace. Also, you can see that Venus, the planet of relating, pretty close to the North Node. That's going to happen this week, but also on Friday, Venus and Mercury come into an exact conjunction. If you have been waiting on news around finances with Mercury retrograde, and it has proved frustrating, a piece of information can come to you then which will absolutely delight you. Also, by the end of the week, as I mentioned before, Mars is moving forwards and darting into that great sextile with Jupiter, one of astrology's most energized connections, but particularly with Mars in house 1, because he rules house 1. Jupiter in house 3 is about how you think, but Jupiter loves to be enthusiastic, and with Uranus in the mix as well, some of the things that were really bugging you last week, by the end of this week can really be unraveling in a very positive way. Not least because on Friday, the sun moves into the third house, joining up with Jupiter and Uranus. The third house sees things speed up. If you have been sort of having to think a lot about the foundational elements of your life or about everyday money, things have felt a bit stuck. You've been waiting to get some green lights. Suddenly things will just power forwards in a very electric and possibly a very exciting way. The only thing about that particular transition is, Pisces, that the sun will square up to Pluto. Third house can be communication, quick communication. Pluto in the 12th house is very much to do with what we can't see. And it's possible that some information will come to you on Friday that you're not necessarily expecting, but that information can actually be very valuable to you. Sometimes when we find out about something that's tricky, initially we have the alarm and shock, but then when we get our head around it, we realise that knowing about it actually is best, because then we can start dealing with it. So something could come to the fore as the week draws to a close, but I feel your financial situation is going to improve, your energy is going to improve, and as long as you're mindful of the square between the sun and the moon, which could make you a little bit free and easy with resources, by the end of the week I think you're going to be feeling a lot more progressive than last week when Mars did apply to Saturn. Really quite a challenging link for you to get through. It's been a real pleasure being with you, Pisces. I hope you have a great week. We have done some research, and 55% of people who watch this channel are not subscribers. If you're one of them, please help this channel grow and click that subscription button and also the bell notification symbol. Every time I drop a video, you'll get an alert.